Hey internets, so recently Valve, aka Steam, has come under attack again as many people along with state legislators call it a monopoly and are calling for the government to step in via antitrust lawsuits and fix things. Or in other words, oh noes, Lord Gaben is getting sued. And so in this quick rant video, I'm just gonna explain why this is wrong, why the reasoning these lawyers, companies, and government officials and their claims against Steam, they don't really make much sense. With the TLDR of those claims being that Valve has a very high market share. Apparently Steam accounts for around 70 to 80% or so of PC game sales, with many game studios of course earning an equal amount of their revenue or so from that. They're also complaining about Valve's 30% commission fees for whenever someone sells the game on Steam's platform. Steam takes a cut. They're also complaining about networking effects, alleged high prices for consumers, which strangely they tend to argue that alongside complaining about Valve's price parity policies, which requires them to sell their games on Steam at the lowest costs. And yes, those of you with keen reasoning skills may immediately notice that that may be just a little bit contradictory, because it kind of is. Don't worry, I'll get to that. I'll first start with Gabe Newell's own reply. His response to these criticisms and allegations seems to be that he's saying that gamers have plenty of options when buying games. Or as this X-Post summarizes his position, according to him, players can choose from many digital stores, including rival platforms and stores run by game publishers themselves. Which is true, which is the main issue with these allegations. Because the reason here for why Gaben is in the right, why Steam is in the right in this issue, it comes down to understanding one of the most obnoxious economics-related midwit memes in existence. Which is this one right here, where you got the low IQ guy saying monopoly occurs when there are no reasonable alternatives, and the high IQ guy saying basically the same thing, monopoly occurs when there are no reasonable alternatives. And then the midwit going, no, monopoly is best empirically measured by market share percentage, because network effects and de facto cash flow utilizations, and forced ROI and competitor-driven liquidity, and this allows them to control the suppliers and stuff, and insert additional finance buzzwords here. You get the picture. This may not seem like much, but it's actually a very damaging misunderstanding, this idea that monopoly is entirely based by the market share that an organization has over a market niche, as opposed to defining it by consumers having no real alternative choices. I've seen a lot of economicists make this mistake, which if you don't know what that is, that's an economist with basically a neo-Marxist tumor growing on their head. Sadly, a very large cyst indeed. In many cases, it's probably terminal. And yes, you can buy a shirt with this meme on my merch store. Link in the description below. Yep, it is real. You can have it. Profits help me pay the bills, which allows me to continue making content. So there you have it. There's my shameless plug for this video. And anyways, the reason I like to call it a neo-Marxist way of looking at the economy is because it's a definition that doesn't really base itself on any real limit of supply or any real issue of scarcity. Rather, instead, by defining it as market share, it's simply defining monopoly as an inequality of outcome in the market, pointing to one guy who's doing better than all the others, and asserting that that's some kind of exploitive monopoly simply by virtue of the fact that they are earning more money. And that's completely arbitrary because it doesn't actually tell you how much they can control that market. When plenty of other alternatives in the market exist, those alternatives do not necessarily need to actually be earning that much of the market share in order to pose a threat to the big 800-pound gorilla, as they sometimes call it. Because if the market leader does do something stupid, in other words, actually does genuinely do something that is anti-consumer, unlike a monopoly as defined by lack of alternatives, when there is alternatives, consumers can just simply instantly switch. Or as I wrote about on X, if Steam did something silly like increase its average prices by 200, 300, or even just a completely ridiculous 600%, and then started pulling games from our libraries, and then tried to force gamers to buy those games again, as kind of a standard policy, or in other words, if Steam started making the same mistakes as some of their competitors have been making, then consumers would just switch to GOG, or they'd switch to Epic, maybe even the Microsoft Store or the PlayStation Network. There's tons of options to go by. I mean, you can just simply Google search and find plenty of markets to buy games. And then if Steam were to make those mistakes, then developers would quickly make the switch as well, because the consumers would quickly make the switch. Because nobody would trust Steam anymore if they did something like that, and because alternatives do exist, Steam therefore can't actually get away with that kind of behavior. Or another example I gave is with YouTube. Let's say that YouTube suddenly required you to pay $50 a month to watch YouTube videos. Well, that would be ridiculous because Rumble and Odysee still exist. In fact, Rumble's been doing relatively well. There's plenty of alternatives for streaming silly videos for free. It's just that YouTube currently has one of the better systems for doing so. It has automatic AI closed captions. Pretty much all of the creators are here on YouTube. It's a relatively fast streaming platform with relatively good servers, and a whole bunch of other things. TLDR, there's a lot of reasons why people watch watch videos on YouTube. It's not necessarily because you have to, you could watch videos elsewhere. It's just that most people decided that it's the best platform right now. But the thing is, if YouTube tried to charge everyone $50 a month for that, that would almost immediately change. You'd probably see a massive switch, and it would be a very quick switch. It would probably only take a week or so. I mean, me personally, as a content creator, if I saw YouTube do that, I'd be like, oh crap, well, this is going down. This is a trash fire. This is a sinking ship. I would port all my content elsewhere, probably on Rumble as well. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that Steam and YouTube are perfect. They absolutely are not, and both have done some shady things. The point here is they don't really have a monopoly, though, because the very existence of alternatives puts a cap on how much shady things they can do. It makes it so that they, at the very least, have to be better than the competition. And what this kind of shows is that you can only really get away with so much when you're the market leader. If alternatives exist and you make stupid decisions, then people will be immediately incentivized to switch. And we can see the same problems if we look at a lot of the other reasons behind the lawsuit against Steam. For example, complaining about the commission fees. Okay, so what? Valve charges developers a commission fee for publishing their games on Steam. Valve takes about 30% of the cut of whatever they make. So what? Big deal. They say this and act like Steam isn't doing anything for developers in return, when in reality they're doing a very big service. Steam has community forums. Steam has game reviews. Steam helps customers discover games that they ordinarily would never even be aware of, so it actually helps with marketing, and regularly pushes new games to the front page. But most importantly is the cost of distribution. Steam is of course using their servers to allow us gamers to buy and download games from those servers. That's actually a very costly logistical thing to Valve. And the silliest part about it is that that 30% commission fee is actually pretty darn competitive. It's actually pretty darn normal for game developers to only get around 20 to 30% or so of the profits of their own game. Things like marketing costs, publisher dues, and distribution deals, all of those things have pretty standard costs around the industry, and have had those costs since long before Steam existed. I mean, heck, back in the day, there were actually even more costs due to the cost of physical media. And so game devs being able to just self-publish their own game on Steam and have it be just there for digital distribution for gamers to find is not a bad deal by any means. And yet these people are acting like this 30% commission from Steam is some kind of uniquely evil thing that Valve just randomly decided to do as a uniquely evil corporation, which is just not true. And really just in general, in industries as a whole, not just the gaming industry, this is again pretty standard. If you have a product and you want to sell that product on a storefront, well, shelf space and cost to move that product to that space costs money. It's not like stores have infinite space to sell infinite goods and can teleport those goods instantly. And much in the same way, even in the digital space where you can kind of instantly transmit information, there's still the costs of servers, there's still the cost of bandwidth, and there's still the cost of software development. And just as a comparison, GOG charges basically the exact same rate that Valve charges. They both charge a 30% cut. And yet they're complaining about it as some uniquely evil thing that Steam does. Which not only is that not true in the gaming industry, it is again not true in just general industry as a whole. Every single section of the economy, even just basic things like selling apples or whatever, has similar associated costs. But then of course there's the price parity argument, which is probably their strongest argument against Valve, and yet it still doesn't really hold up when you analyze it a bit. The basic gist of how the Steam's price parity policy works is that they just don't want people selling games for cheaper elsewhere than Steam. And so the allegations are that their policy is that they'll pull games from Steam if they try to sell the game for less elsewhere. And the issue with that is it's not actually as bad as it sounds, because all they're really doing is effectively the exact same policy as price matching. They're just putting the responsibility of that on the publisher or the developer of the game itself. For example, one of my local Best Buys has a policy where they'll price match with Amazon. If they have a product that they are selling, you go to them in the store and you show how the same product is being sold on Amazon for cheaper, then they'll match Amazon's price. And the thing is, the point of that is entirely just to be pro-consumer. It's so that they're offering prices that the customers want at the lowest possible price. It's just a way for them to be competitive. Now, Steam, on the other hand, they as a storefront want the developers and publishers to set the prices themselves, rather than it being done by store employees. So this whole price parity thing is kind of the same thing. They're just shifting it to them instead. It's just another way of ensuring that Steam always has the lowest price. Because the way they're wording it makes it almost sound as if Steam is not allowing them to have sales elsewhere, which is ridiculous. That is completely false. No, developers absolutely can have sales elsewhere so long as they also have the sale on Steam. So it's not actually that big of an ask. This doesn't encourage higher costs. In fact, if anything, it just encourages lower costs. There's an argument that people could sell it for less outside of Steam if they didn't have Steam's price parity policy policies. But if they really want to sell their game for less, again, there's no real issue with also having it on Steam, even when you consider the commission rate, because they're showing their product to more customers and thus breaking even at the very least. And if you look at the price of games over time, the evidence is actually that video games have fallen in price. I remember in the 90s, games used to be $49.99, $59.99. It used to be a very standard thing, which, that's pretty much the same cost as a AAA title today. But you also gotta consider inflation. That $50 AAA game from the mid-90s today would be $110. And since Steam is often accredited to saving the PC gaming market, the increase in game developer competition very likely contributed to this fact. And so if anything, Steam has actually reduced prices for consumers. So then, what's the fuss all about? Why are they slapping Steam with such a ridiculous lawsuit that appears to be based on such ridiculous reasoning? Honestly, I don't know, but I do have my suspicions. The first of these is that Valve is entirely privately held. It is not a publicly traded company, and well, the powers that be, they don't really like that because that means they can't directly control it. It's a lot harder for the state to control a company like that. Another reason, which is a bit more of a just completely unproven conspiracy theory admittedly, is that Gabe Newell and Steam have been pretty heavily pushing Linux as a viable desktop alternative. In fact, I've been using Pop! OS 24 lately, and Proton plays about 95% of my library without any kind of problems. And that's just another thing that the powers that be do not like. It's a lot harder for them to control Linux users. Sure, it's still a small percentage, so again, this could just be a silly conspiracy theory, but it is at least noteworthy enough to draw suspicion. Or in other words, there is a moderate chance that this is all just lawfare. They don't actually sincerely believe that Steam is a monopoly. They're just butthurt because Gaben refuses to be controlled. Or at least that's how I see it. And so that's all I have to say on this matter. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And if you like my content, you can support me on Ko-Fi, Subscribestar, or by buying some merch. Thanks for watching. Till next time.